Kane County Floodplain Awareness, our virtual open house, which will be running all week. So we have a series of sessions each day. Today is just an introductory session. My name's Ann Wilford. I'm with the Department of Environmental and Water Resources with Kane County. I am a water resource engineer, practiced for over 25 years now, and I've worked in public and private sector and in education as well. I wanted just to start by thanking the Conservation Foundation for their time in helping us put this event together. Jessica Mino with the Conservation Foundation is on with us. We actually worked together at Kane County, and we had hoped to put on an open house for the years we worked together. So I'm glad to work with Jessica today to be able to do our virtual open house. And with us also is Ivy Klee with Kane County Department of Environmental and Water Resources. And thank you, Ivy, today for your help and assistance. We can just go through a few housekeeping notes. As I mentioned previously, all presentations are being recorded and will be posted later to our website, likely again as YouTube links so that they can be viewed again. Also, check out our website as we'll be updating that throughout the week with information on presentations and other materials that we're going to share throughout the week. Any questions that you have can be put into the chat box. There's a question and answer also, but I think it's easier if everyone just uses the chat box. Ivy and Jessica will be monitoring those to make sure that we're seeing your questions. You can also email me. That's my email address there. If you have a question about like your particular property or something that you don't want answered in this format, feel free to email me. If there's any certified floodplain managers on the Zoom call today, please sign into the chat when prompted. And if you could sign in now, that would be great. If you don't want your email public, just make sure you're messaging either Ivy or Jessica, and they will record your email so that we can send that to the Association of State Floodplain Managers so you can get credit for the hours. This is the link for our page if you're interested in registering for any of the other sessions that we'll be having this week and seeing that extra information that we'll be posting throughout the week as well. This floodplain awareness is geared towards residents as well as professionals, including realtors. We spend a lot of time talking to realtors about property that's for sale and helping them understand what they're marketing. So we're hoping to help them with some more knowledge and information this week. I'm just going to go through the lineup of what to expect for this week. Today we'll just have a general introduction to common terms used when discussing floodplain, some resources for finding floodplain maps, and our emergency management office has shared some information on flood safety and preparedness and some video links that you can watch as well. And then finally, we'll be ending up with some important rules and regulations that exist if you own property in the floodplain so that you can understand kind of what the expectations are, the do's and don'ts of living in the floodplain. Welcome you to come back on Tuesday when Brian Christopherson will be talking to folks at 10 o'clock. Brian's going to do a presentation for professionals in the building, construction, and permitting areas, as well as realtors and business owners on understanding active and passive flood protection. Brian's a certified floodplain manager and works with floodproofing.com, and that's a company that's been providing global floodproofing product options and education to design professionals, municipalities, and property owners. At 11 o'clock on Tuesday, Brian will be back again, and this time he's gearing his conversation towards residents as well as professionals and business owners on flood risk reduction. There are some professional hours available for those for that second session as well. Brian's informed us. There's a wealth of information on Wednesday, as Kane County's Rob Lenke will present to residents the importance of wetlands. Rob's got over 25 years experience in the field of civil and environmental engineering, and Rob will answer questions like, what is a wetland? What's so great about wetlands? The answer there, or a hint to the answer, is there's lots that's great about wetlands. And are there wetlands maps? And what are the do's and don'ts of caring for wetlands? So join Rob on Wednesday at 10 for that presentation. We're not done with Wednesday. Jennifer Hammer with the Conservation Foundation is putting on a presentation to help homeowners, homeowner associations, business owners, residents, and contracts. Let them know what they need to know about detention basin maintenance, the responsibilities, and the benefits of a well-maintained basin. Yes, a well-maintained basin can prevent flooding in your home and improve the water quality. So join Jennifer at noon on, that actually should say Wednesday there. So on noon on Wednesdays for Jennifer. On Thursday, we have folks from FEMA and from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and they'll talk to you about all things related to the National Flood Insurance Program and flood insurance. They'll tackle such topics as substantial improvement and damage and what this means to homeowners. We're pleased to have James Sink and Ashley Ryman from FEMA, as well as Marilyn Succo from IDNR, to share all they know about the NFIP. It's a great group, so I hope you'll join us. And their presentation starts at 10 on Thursday. Then we have a fabulous Friday with Jessica Mino with the Conservation Foundation, talking to homeowners about ways to manage stormwater and reduce the risk of flooding at home. Expect to learn more about rain barrels, rain gardens, and even fall cleanup, including leaf management. Jessica's presentation starts at noon. And we're closing out our Friday of this virtual open house with a presentation from Dan Lobus with the Foundation, and he will discuss the Conservation Development Natural Areas Assurance Program. This presentation will be of interest to professionals in the community as well as developers, as Dan discusses the benefits of conservation-focused development on stormwater management and how to build in successful maintenance. Dan will follow Jessica's presentation, so join Dan at 1 p.m. on Friday for this informative session. So for today, I'm going to go through some acronyms that you may hear today and during this week. Government workers and engineers love acronyms, so if you don't know what an acronym means, please ask. So the one we're most familiar with floodplain management is FEMA, and that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency. You also heard me mention NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. You'll hear the term firm, which means that's a flood insurance rate map. A pre-firm building and a post-firm building, they are exactly what they say. A pre-firm building is a building before we had those flood insurance rate maps, and a post-firm is after those maps were created. We'll also talk about floodplain and regulatory floodplain. You'll hear the terms USACE, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, sometimes we just call them the Corps, and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, IDNR. We'll also talk about floodway, and you may see this term, LAG, lowest adjacent grade, important when you're talking about homes in and structures in the floodplain to know the lowest adjacent grade elevation. And you'll hear the term base flood elevation, or BFE. So what is the NFIP? It's a voluntary federal program that provides flood insurance to property owners and participating communities. They maps and grants in exchange for community adopting and enforcing floodplain management regulations. We think of the NFIP as a stool that needs 4 legs. One of the important legs is insurance. Flood insurance is an important part of the NFIP. Mitigation grants. How can we reduce flooding, and how do we mitigate after a flood? Flood insurance rate maps, those firms that we just mentioned before, as part of the NFIP, and building codes, regulations, and CRS, which is the community rating system. Building codes and regulations are what the local floodplain officials have to make sure are being followed. Definition of a flood. This is a definition from the NFIP, and they define it as a general and temporary condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land or 2 or more properties. Floods are inevitable natural events. Floods are by far the most common natural disaster in Illinois, accounting for well over 90% of the declared disasters. It's estimated that there are over 250,000 buildings that are located in the floodplains in Illinois. There's different types of floods. So one is a flash flood, and that's a rapid and extreme flow of high water into a normally dry area, or a rapid water level rise in a stream or creek above a predetermined level. Riverine flooding occurs when river levels rise and overflow their banks or the edges of the main channel and inundate areas that are normally dry. Picture of the Fox River with some riverine flooding. Urban flooding is defined as flooding not in undeveloped or agricultural areas where water enters a building through walls, openings, floor connections, through seams and cracks, or accumulation of water on public property or rights-of-way. This is an example from, I believe, a 2015 flood in Chicago. Other types of flooding, there's coastal flooding, not really an issue for us. Tropical systems, ice debris and jams is a type of flooding. This is an example of an ice jam along the Fox River from 2010. Snow melts, obviously, have snow and it melts, and then dam and levee breaks. You may have heard about some of the more extreme examples of those in Michigan. There over the last few years. For more information on the types of flooding, a good resource is our National Weather Service, or NOAA, and I've included a link there. If you want to do more reading on that, feel free to do that. I wanted to share a quick video. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, but this is an example of a flash flood that took place in Galesburg, Illinois. So that's a rough problem. apologize. I'm not sure if the sound's working.
And I don't think we can hear the sound,
It's
but we can
security
see the
footage.
video. Yep.
Security footage. So you can just see as the water builds up and then the pressure gets great enough that it breaks through the doors. So, I wanted to let you see like that's security footage from the Carl Sandburg College in Galesburg, Illinois, and that's after 3 inches of rain. They had 3 inches of rain in about 90 minutes, and it caused the water came up that fast that it caused that problem. That particular area isn't mapped as a regulatory floodplain and isn't adjacent to a river, so it's impressive to see how powerful the water is that it accumulated that fast and caused that destruction. So an important thing to notice about this was that this 3-inch storm, which may not sound like a lot, but it did come in a short amount of time, and it did follow an incredibly rainy season for that community. We talk about floodplain. Floodplain is actually anywhere it can rain, so we all live in floodplain, but regulatory floodplain is the land that is subject to a 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year. So we used to call this the 100-year floodplain and subject to the 100-year event. But the industry standard now is to say it's the 1%. And the reason is that it can happen more often than once in 100 years. It has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. Another term that you hear when you hear about floodplain is, and regulatory floodplain, is the flood height. And we talk about that base flood elevation. That's the flood elevation for that 100-year floodplain. And then another term that you hear is floodway. And that's a calculated flood region that's defined by shrinking in your floodplain. So if your floodplain exists like this, that's your 1% chance floodplain. If we shrink it in and allow, in the state of Illinois, we allow for a 0.1 foot surcharge or increase in flood height, that's what we call the floodway. And this is an area that we really want to protect. So obviously we don't want to have these areas in this flood fringe fill up, but we really want to protect that floodway. And so that's an important part of floodplain management. So what are the chances that my home will flood? Well, FEMA provides official floodplain maps, and you want to look for the firm for your neighborhood and see. But don't just stop there at looking at the flood insurance rate map. There's more to the story that with flooding. The floodplain maps that you'll see will have that 100-year and 500-year or 1% and 0.2% flood on them. But the FEMA does have available various other storms. And these are showing some houses that exist within these elevations. So this house here has a 10% chance of flooding in a single. And this one over here is high enough that it's outside the 100-year flood, but it still has a 0.2% chance of flooding every year. It's within the 500-year floodplain, or the 0.2% chance floodplain. And House B is subjected to the 1% as well as the 0.2%. So my colleague, Rob Linke, has done a lot of work in mapping our storm events and following local storm events, and he put together this exhibit for us today. The blue line there shows that 100-year storm, or that 1% chance, and the orange or peach-colored is the 500-year, or the 0.2%. And within this, Rob's included some significant events that have happened fairly recently, or at least if you're my age, fairly recently in the area. In fact, all of these are post-2000, with the exception of the 1996 flood, where we noted 16.91 inches, well above the 500-year floodplain. But if you look, for example, at this 4-inch storm event in McHenry, Illinois, not far away at all, they had 3.2 inches, which is really close to the 100-year event for a 1-hour storm. So the 100-year event isn't a single storm event. There's various storms that can that are considered that 1% chance of flooding. And so you can see here that the typical storm that we think of, that 24-year storm event for Kane County, is 8.57 inches in a 24-hour time span. Well, not too long ago, in July, we had a 7.79-inch storm event in St. Louis, Missouri. So not too long ago and not too far away, we had an event that was really close to our 100-year 24-hour storm event. And you can see some of these others. Naperville in 2013. In 48 hours, they had a significant event. Chicago in 2020 had a 3-day storm with quite a bit of accumulation. And then these events here, are exceeding what we would call the 100-year, the 1% storm. So the takeaway from this exhibit is the significant flood events that we've had. And as I said, they're not that far away in time that our community or communities near us have experienced flood events. Right here in St. Charles, Illinois, we show a 10.51-inch event for September of 2008, which that exceeded the 100-year. And then just to kind of bring that impact home of these storms that are shown in that previous graph, these are some flooding that was experienced from those storm events. So that's our 1996 flood, which started a lot of conversation and stormwater and floodplain management in full force for Kane County. So we've got our heavy rainfalls, which we showed you the graph for that, but there's other factors that can affect flooding. And so our heavy rains, so you saw those graphs, those affect it. Overflowing rivers, if the rivers are already flowing high and you get a storm event, it doesn't have to be the 100-year storm event to experience some significant flooding. If those rivers are already high, that riverine flooding is gonna happen that much sooner. If there's a failure in a dam, obviously you're protected as long as the dam's there, and should they break, then that's a potential issue. Damaged or blocked stormwater infrastructure. We're going to talk about this later, but certainly we want our stormwater systems to be functioning. Those affect how an area will flood. Your impervious area. And again, we're going to talk about this when Rob talks about wetlands later in the week, and Jessica talks about some backyard solutions. That green space is important to mitigate flooding. If you can imagine, the more impervious area, the more gray, the more buildings, the more sidewalks and roadways and parking lots that we have, the faster the water moves. So another thing to consider is how saturated is the ground. Has it rained a lot recently? And the ground just can't soak up anymore. A smaller storm event can cause flooding issues if that's the case. And then we've got our melting snow and ice. We mentioned the ice jams, but as well the snow and ice as that melts. that can contribute to flooding. Or if it hasn't melted yet, if the ground's still frozen and we get a rain event, that's basically, all we've got is impervious surface if everything's frozen. I just included the bathtub here. Not that that's a flooding event that we regulate. If you overflow your bathtub, the local floodplain managers don't worry about that. But the analogy is flooding's kind of like a bathtub, and as you get a little bit of rain and it's draining well, that's fine. But as that system gets full and inundated, it doesn't drain as well. And if you have maybe a sponge in your bathtub, and that can help soak up some water, so that's helping with the flooding as well too. So if we think of the sponge as the ground, if the ground's able to soak it up, that's helpful to us. So if think of the tubs as our rivers and creeks, and if they're empty, there's lots of room. If there's a sponge to soak up some of the water, that's great. And then think of our storm sewer systems. If those are working well and functioning, then the water is able to flow through the pipes from your tub too. So that's the bathtub analogy for flooding. So I mentioned those floodplain maps, and there's a couple ways to get some floodplain maps if you're live in Kane County. If you live in another county, our surrounding counties also have floodplain mapping available on their websites. But if you just Google Kane County GIS and click on the page that says Maps, you'll have an option for our Kane GIS 4 viewer, option B. Click on that, and you've got a screen that looks something like this here at the bottom. When you're there, you can type in your address, or if you know the parcel number, you can use the parcel number. And the other thing you want to pay attention to when you're looking at this Kane GIS viewer is the layers. And so there's lots of layers, and I encourage you to go to this page. We've got a fantastic GIS department here at Kane County, and I just encourage you to see all the resources that are available on this page. We've got aerial photographs, topography, and then and various other layers that are a lot of information about the community that you live in. So I encourage you to go to that page. This is the address for the Kane County Government Center at 719 South Batavia Avenue. And so I just entered that in to demonstrate what a floodplain map would look like. I put on the FEMA layer, and you'll notice there's a floodway layer, a 100-year flood, and a 500-year. And so the different colors denote those different layers. And you could certainly have selected the aerial so you could see the actual image of the area you're looking at. So the floodway is represented with the yellow crosshatching. The pink is that 1% flood, or the 100-year flood, and the blue is the 500-year flood. So, and that's where we're located here in the area. But as I said, more to the story. And if you look at those layers, and the layers are expanded here so you can see all the different layers that are available. But if you put on that stormwater layer, there's storm sewer, drain tiles, flow paths, detention basin, and potential flood inundation. That'll tell you a little bit more about your potential for flooding. These maps are being updated continually. Again, my colleague Rob Linkley has put many hours into this, and we appreciate this resource, and it tells us a lot about the potential for flooding. And so as we go through the potential flood inundation, our GIS department, along with the Water Resources Group, has created this layer to let us know that should these storm sewer pipes not be functioning properly, this is the type of and together with the topography, this is the type of flooding that we can expect. The different colors each reflect a different half foot of flood height that's possible in that area. So that tells us, when we talked about the bathtub analogy, that tells us we want to make sure that this drain, that this storm sewer is functioning. We don't want an issue with our storm sewers not being able to drain an area in a flood event. And then the other part that's interesting, and we certainly use it all the time as water resource engineers and as floodplain managers, are these flow paths that are available on this layer. So you can create those yourselves. If you see the topography of the land, you can tell how the water flows, and that's how these flow paths were created. So that lets you know where the water is draining to, and it can kind of give you an idea of the area that's draining to that particular point. So again, I encourage you to go to these maps, and I'm hoping that my colleague Rob Linke will be able to discuss some of more of this during the week. If you don't have a chance to hear Rob later this week talk about wetlands and mapping, there is a YouTube video available that discusses how we got this mapping. So I just went through the Kane CAD or the Kane GIS mapping that's available to Kane County residents. The other source of mapping that you can get is from FEMA. And to find that mapping, if you Google FEMA Map Service Center, this will be, or hopefully, depending on how Google works, this will be the first choice that you have here. And if you click on that link, or I've provided the link here as well too, so when the presentation is posted, you can use that. That'll bring you to this portal here, where there's a section to enter your address. So pretty easy, and it works for the entire country. So if you're outside Kane County, as long as you're in the U.S., you can enter any address in the U.S. and this will pull up the flood mapping for that, the floodplain map. I will caution, especially for potential home buyers and realtors, that sometimes this site is really busy and doesn't always work quite as quickly as we'd like it to. Be patient with it. Sometimes you think, oh, great, there's no floodplain, and there is. I always encourage you to zoom out and make sure you can see the Fox River, or zoom out more, make sure you can see the Mississippi River. If there's no floodplain showing on the Fox River or the Mississippi, then those layers aren't coming through yet. So just be careful when you use this. It's a great resource. Again, it's any address in the country you can put in, but make sure that you're seeing those layers. And one of the options when you pull up, I put in the same address, our Kane County government building, and so you can see a part of the map. But one of the options is that you can print out a FIRMAT or a small flood insurance rate map for your area. So as you do that, you can see here you've got some flood heights listed, and then those are for the 100-year flood. That's the base flood elevation that we talked about. The hatched area, again, is the floodway. They use a little bit different colors, but the greenish blue, teal, I guess, is that 100-year flood, or the 1%, and then the brownish salmon pink color is the 500-year or the 0.2%. So that's how you read. I would also just encourage you, if you look at these maps or the Kane GIS maps that show floodplain, if there's floodplain anywhere near the parcel you're looking at, the parcel you're interested in, or that you live in, I encourage you to call your local floodplain manager. If you live in unincorporated Kane County, that's us here. Myself and my colleagues can help you understand the map. We've got 1-foot topography that sometimes shows that these maps aren't as accurately drawn. Now that we've got the 1-foot topography, we can give you a more accurate assessment of where the floodplain is on the property. So whether you pull up the KaneCAD GIS or you pull up the map from the FEMA website, if it's anywhere close, give your local floodplain manager a call. If you live in a certified community in Kane County, so any of our municipalities, go to their website and look for the engineer for that community, and they can help you understand the floodplain and how close it is to your house. So if you've determined that you live in or near a floodplain, it's important to know that there's rules and regulations for that regulatory floodplain. So what you see in those maps, and all communities in Kane County participate in our Kane County Stormwater Ordinance. So all the communities, whether you live in unincorporated Kane or one of our municipalities, they all follow these rules. And all activity in the floodplain requires a permit with your local municipality, or again, with us folks here at the county if you're in unincorporated. One easy, important rule to remember: there's no fill in the floodplain. And what do we consider floodplain? Anything that's filling up volume in the floodplain. So dirt, buildings, old tires, cars that aren't operable, above ground pools. These are all considered fill in the floodplain and not allowed. If you fill in the floodplain without a permit, then that's a violation. And I would encourage you to call your local permitting authority, your municipality, or us here at the county, and we can help you understand how to rectify that situation. Another thing about the floodplain is fences. Fences in the floodplain are something that you can apply for a permit for, but keep in mind that fence needs to be 50% open. So you have to think about a picket fence or a chain link fence or a split rail fence, something that's 50% open, something that's not going to block the flow. What about if you're resurfacing your driveway? You think, do I need a permit for that? Well, if you live in the floodplain, actually you do. And what we want to make sure with that is that we're not putting fill in the floodplain, that if you're resurfacing your driveway, that you're taking the existing surface, mill that off, dispose of that outside of the floodplain, and and resurface your driveway to match the existing drain. Great, sorry. If you want to have a small shed in the floodplain, there's rules and regulations for that. Brian's going to talk some more about the floodproofing that's available for that. And I'm going to share a slide with you on what the wet floodproofing should look like if you're looking at permitting a shed in the floodplain. Something you can always do in the floodplain is elevate your house to reduce the risk of flooding, and not just elevate your house if that's not a viable option for you at this time. Look at elevating your HVAC system. Is your air conditioner elevated above the flood protection or the floodplain elevation that base flood elevation. So can we save those mechanicals in your house from getting flooded? And then the other thing to know about living in the floodplain is that all improvements and damages to structures in the floodplain are tracked by your local floodplain official. And there'll be another slide on that later, but also tune in Thursday as Marilyn and Ashley go through the ins and outs of substantial improvement and damages and how those work and the implications of those. So that was just the floodplain. If you're in that floodway area that we talked about earlier, there's even more regulations. So it's even more strictly regulated. So for Kane County, all projects within the floodplain need permitting with the IDNR, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and your local community. I encourage you to contact your local floodplain official if you're in a municipality, or if you're an unincorporated Kane, contact myself. And you can apply for a stormwater permit for any project that you're thinking of doing. There is a joint application. The link is here for applying for a permit from IDNR and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Just for emphasis, all activity in the floodplain needs a permit. Everything. Yes, everything. Only appropriate uses will be permitted in the floodway. The Kane County Stormwater Ordinance goes through what those appropriate uses are. There'll be a link on our website to that section of the ordinance if you'd like to read that. If you live on the water and you want a dock, there are rules for that. You need a permit with the county or your local municipality and the IDNR and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Other restrictions on the floodway: no new homes in the floodway. You can't build a house. We don't want folks living in that area. We don't want to create fill, as we said, and we want to keep people safe. So no new homes in the floodway. And the other restriction is no fences in the floodway. We don't want to block flow. That's the crucial area that we want for conveyance of flood. I mentioned sheds. Our stormwater ordinance goes through the stipulations for having a shed in the floodplain, and you can see that here. We have to have it anchored. Utilities have to be elevated. It's not to be inhabited, and it requires floodplain openings, and that's that wet floodproofing that we talked about before. And Brian will share more on that on Tuesday with you. And then some information on being prepared for a flood. Some important steps that you can take is buy flood insurance. And James will help you understand more about the National Flood Insurance Program and our new risk rating 2.0 that's been introduced for that program. So James has a wealth of information. I encourage you to come back on Thursday to hear what he has to say. Another important thing to be prepared is make a plan for your household and your pets. And I took the opportunity. I'm a big dog person. I include a couple of dogs here. So make a plan for yourself and your pets in the case of a flood. Where will you go to? Where do you keep your important documents? Are you prepared for a flood event? So you want to think of having supplies like non-perishable food, cleaning supplies. You may need water in the event of a large storm. And so you want to make sure you have that clean water. You want to have access to a radio so that you have information on upcoming storm events. Your cell phone not charged or working. A few facts about floods, just to bring it home how important it is to understand your flood risk and be prepared for a flood. Floods are the #1 natural disaster in the U.S. The flood losses in the U.S. average $2.4 billion every year for the last decade. An inch of water has $25,000 of damage to your home. It doesn't sound like much water, but I'm sure any of you that have experienced even that small depth of flooding in your house know what kind of havoc that can do on your home. It's important to know that your homeowner's insurance doesn't cover flood damage. You need to have flood insurance. And again, James will help walk you through that the NFIP and flood insurance. And then the other fact that's important to note there is that 30% of all flood insurance claims are filed in low to moderate risk areas. Just because you don't live in a floodplain doesn't mean it can't flood, and it doesn't mean you don't need flood insurance. So I encourage you, even folks outside of that regulated floodplain, look at flood insurance options. So, few points here on flood safety and awareness. I would strongly recommend going to this ready.gov website. They've got a great set of information. That plan that we talked about previously, they go through a checklist on how to create that plan, and they go through the different types of flooding and how to react to that. One thing to keep in mind, if there is a flood warning, find safe shelter right away. You should not be walking, swimming, or driving through floodwaters. Keep in mind that 6 inches of moving water is enough to knock you over if you're on foot, and 1 foot of moving water can sweep your vehicle away, and that's very scary. Most of the deaths that happen in flooding in urban areas is from with vehicles being swept away. So it's important to note that. We also recommend that you stay off of bridges over fast-moving water during a flood. And then, depending on the type of flood, stay tuned to your radio and your National Weather Service. And if your community advises you to evacuate, make sure you're doing that. That's for your own safety. Move to higher ground. That might be the best option if it's flooding in your area. And sometimes it's best to stay put. So listen to the flood warnings and follow the advice of your emergency response people in your community. So that ready.gov goes through a whole bunch of advice for after a flood. And again, I encourage you to look through that. But when we do have the flooded waters, especially the flooded streets, avoid driving through those streets. The movement of the water from people driving through there can cause further flood damage for folks. And again, we don't want to be driving through moving flood water. So don't drive. Make sure you're wearing protective equipment when you're doing your cleanup. Some of those waters are not clean, and so we want to keep you safe. There's mold and mildew associated with flooding. There can be sewage in the water. So Another note is be aware of the risk of electrocution. Don't touch any electrical equipment if it's wet or if you're standing in water. When it's safe to do so, turn off the electricity to avoid an electric shock. Avoid wading in flood waters. As I mentioned, they can be contaminated and with chemicals or sewage, and there could also be dangerous sharp debris in there that you're not aware of. In addition to the down power lines, so there's that risk of electrocution. If you have a generator and you're using that during your flood event, make sure you're using that outdoors so that you're safe from the fumes from that generator. And then I do encourage you after it floods to take pictures of your damage. Ideally, as part of your planning, taking pictures of your belongings before the flood, but take pictures of the damage. Seek medical attention if you want it. Get your drinking water tested, especially if you have a well and that well's been inundated. The well has been inundated with water. You may need to get your well disinfected. Reach out to your insurance agent, let them know what's happened, and ask them the next step. I do encourage you to get your damage assessment permits. If it's flooded in your community, you'll be given instructions on how to apply for a damage assessment permit. And finally, I would recommend verifying the credentials of any contractors that you hire. Unfortunately, sometimes there's some bad players after flood events, so be careful. Make sure you get references and check those out before you hire them for any work to remove damage from flood. As I mentioned, Kane County Emergency Management, they're a response team when it floods, and they've shared a couple of videos with us. So I encourage you to watch those. I clipped out this one scene from the second video where it can flood, or where it can rain, it can flood. So if you just remember that, anywhere it can rain, it can flood. And then again, they referred to that ready.gov website, which has lots of information. Thank you to our emergency management for the work they do during our flood events and the preparation that they take to mitigate them. This I mentioned earlier, substantial improvement and substantial damage. This is something that's important to all communities that participate in the National Flood Insurance program, which Kane County and all its municipalities do participate in that program, have to track substantial improvement and substantial damage. Marilyn and Ashley are going to go through and talk in much more detail than I will say about that, but I just wanted to give you an overview before then that substantial improvement is any reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or any other improvement to a structure, the cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value of the structure before the start of the project. So basically, the long and short of this is if you do improvements, your community is tracking those improvements. Should those improvements ever hit the 50% mark, then we have to talk about bringing your building into compliance with our building protection standards. And it's the same with damage. So, and in Kane County, the damages and improvements are tracked cumulatively since 2010. So all the damage and all the improvements that happen to a structure within the floodplain is tracked. And when it hits 50% of the value of the home, then we have to talk about bringing that home into compliance with our building protection standards. And the calculation here, the cost to repair over the market value of the building. And the cost to repair includes both the materials to repair and the labor to repair it. And the fair market value for both of those things, regardless if you do the work yourself, we're still required to put a fair market value on both the materials and the labor for damages and for improvement. And then there's various ways to calculate the market value of the building. A lot of communities, such as ours, use the assessors, the township assessors, to determine the market value of the building. And if you think you know the market value of your property, keep in mind that this calculation is based on the market value of just the building, not the property, not the lease. And I mentioned, should you hit that 50% mark, what do we do? And our options are FRED. Who is FRED? Well, FRED's another acronym, and it stands for flood-proof. So one way to come into compliance is to flood-proof your home. And I've given an example here where we've had a house that's below the base flood elevation, below that 100-year flood elevation, and they've abandoned their first story and then flood vented the bottom. There's other regulations like we don't want any of your HVAC or plumbing also within that area as well. But this is one method of floodproofing. This is wet floodproofing. There's dry floodproofing that's available, but that is not for residential structures or industry. Another option to come into compliance if you've reached that 50% mark is relocate your home. So can you relocate it within your property and move it out of the floodplain, or is there a better spot to relocate to? So that's an option. Some folks choose to elevate their existing home, and I've given an example here of a home that's been elevated. So they elevated the existing home. They put a garage space underneath. It'll be flood vented, similar to this example, the first example there, and elevated. And so the first floor is well above that base flood elevation, and now safe from flooding and compliance. And third option would be to demolish the home and return that area to open space. This is just our building protection standards from our stormwater ordinance, and I shouldn't have highlighted the adjacency because we're actually talking about in the floodplain. But be aware that in Kane County, when we look at elevating our homes, where we want that first floor to be, we want it to be 3 feet above that base flood elevation if you're on the Fox River. And for all our other floodplains, we're looking for you to be 2 feet above that base flood elevation. I'll just go back. That'll apply. So we don't want you just above the base flood elevation. We want you 2 to 3 feet, depending on where your structure is. We want that first floor to be raised that high. Okay. So again, I wanted to say thank you to the participants and the attendees and Kane County and my coworkers here at the Department of Environmental and Water Resources. Especially, I would like to thank my director, Jody Woolnock, my colleague, Rob Linke, for his help with my presentation today and presenting later this week, and Ivy Lee, who is helping us throughout the week with this presentation, with our presentations and getting that information out to everybody. My contact information is here. Again, if you have any further questions, feel free to call or email me. I'd be happy to help. Just going to close out with the flyer from our virtual floodplain awareness open house. It's got the link to what to register for, so I encourage you to look into some of those other presentations. We'll be talking about a lot of what I talked about today in greater detail. So, if there's any questions, maybe Ivy or Jessica could help with that?